consider yourselves very welcome for session 3 of 4 in our 20th annual Fall Ethics Symposium. The session chair for session 3 is CRC Honors Program alum, Gail Brown. Join me in welcoming her to the podium.
Thank you, Dr. Swan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Brielle Brown. I'm an alum of the Cosumnes River College Honors Program, and currently I'm interning within the English department. After this introduction, the session will consist of our main speaker's presentation, which will be about 40 minutes. Following the presentation, we'll hear quickly from our formal respondents, to whom our speaker will then have the chance to reply. Finally, you all will be able to ask questions. Please note that this event is being filmed for broadcast by the Sacramento Educational Cable Consortium. Our speaker for this session is Andrew Jason Cohen. Everyone put your hands together. Dr. Cohen is a professor of philosophy and a founding director of the Interdisciplinary Studies program in philosophy, politics, and economics at Georgia State University. He's the author of Toleration and Freedom from Harm, Liberalism Reconceived, and Toleration. His areas of expertise include social discourse, social and political philosophy, and applied ethics. His presentation for us this afternoon will be on engaging with each other, why, and how. Please join me in welcoming Professor Cohen.
Thanks very much, and thank you for having me. Thanks for the invitation. This has been great so far. I feel like there's been a little bit too much agreement between the speakers, though. So part of me wants to say I'm just going to say they're wrong and then move on somehow. But I can't really get myself to do that with a straight face, because I largely do agree with everybody that's talked so far, and I suspect in you. But there's a paradox in there, right? In that we all tend to agree with each other, right? And what we want is, as we've been saying throughout, we want people to disagree. Right? I think that's hugely important. And what I'm going to do today is talk about why it's so important that we disagree with each other, why it's important to engage with one another, whether we agree or disagree. I'm not going to stop there, though. I'm going to also talk about how to do it. I'm going to give you a method for actually agreeing and disagreeing. In part because I want to get past this paradox, and I want us to figure out a way to improve everything, ourselves and our society. So we're going to do that. I'm not going to read through these. That's an outline of the talk. So why should we engage more? And when I'm talking about engaging, I'm talking about really, truly engaging with one another, whether we agree or disagree. Right? Too often on college campuses and in the rest of the world, people will say they're agreeing with others or just refuse to say why they don't agree for various reasons. We think that we are insulting one another if we don't agree with each other, things like that. That's a problem, right? In my view, failing to indicate when you disagree with somebody, that's disrespectful, right? It basically says to them, I don't think you're capable of understanding my point of view. I don't think you're capable of seeing why I think you're wrong. I don't think you're worth engaging with. That's disrespectful, right? Real respect, we want to respect each other as persons, right? To go back to the first talk. Real respect requires that we recognize that everybody is capable of understanding these things. Or at least if we want to show respect to a particular person, we have to assume that they are capable of understanding. So we should do that, and we should do that in part because, so I'm going to give you 3 reasons to think we should do this. One is the loneliness epidemic, right? I think for the last, when did this come out? A year and a half ago, they announced that we were in a loneliness epidemic. I don't know what to make of the loneliness epidemic exactly, but there seems to be something clearly right about it, right? We see a rise in rates of depression. We see a rise in rates of suicide. We see basically a lot of people, I have a family member like this, who spend a lot of time in their room on screen, maybe talking to people, maybe not talking to people, but not wanting to go out and actually engage with others. If you're going to do that, well, of course you're going to be lonely. And of course you're going to get depressed, right? You don't want to be lonely, you don't want to be depressed, go out and talk to people, right? And it doesn't have to be people you agree with. In fact, it shouldn't always be people you agree with. So the second reason that we need to engage with each other is what people talk about a lot these days, polarization, right? We have in this country more or less two big political camps. I don't know if you want to call them Democrat and Republican or woke and anti-woke or whatever it might be, but they don't talk to each other, or at least they don't talk to each other enough. For what it's worth, polarization amongst the general population is not as high as people think. It's polarization amongst political elites that's really quite high. And as was pointed out before, this goes back to Clinton and Newt Gingrich. There was something rather intentional about this. The government stopped funding get-togethers where Democrats and Republicans can talk with one another. Right? This was part of basically a plan from Newt Gingrich, who stopped having that funding in Congress and basically told Republicans, don't associate with the Democrats. That's a bad way to go. What we need to do is have people engaging with one another so that they don't get polarized. I don't just mean this for Congress people and other politicians, I mean that for all of us. Right? And again, this was spoken about before. You don't want to live with somebody because they're a Democrat, or you don't want to live with them because you're a Republican. That's bizarre, right? The polls show people would rather not live with somebody that they politically disagree with, or they'd rather live with, let me say this better, they'd rather live with somebody who's a mess, who's sloppy, than live with somebody who politically disagrees with them. That's bizarre. Right? Marriage rates. Parents now say, fine if their kid marries somebody of a different race, but not of a different political party. Right? That's bizarre. Right? I mean, I don't think it should matter what race they are, but I don't think it should matter what political party they are either. Right? So if we want to end polarization, if we want to at least limit it, we need to have more engagement. Finally, just the moral imperative. If you want to improve yourself, if you want to grow in any particular way, you need to engage with people that you disagree with, right? So you come to college. If you only ever go to classes where you agree with everything that's said by the teacher and by the students, you're not going to learn anything new. You're not really going to grow, right? To actually grow as a human being, as a person, as a being that's capable of reasoning, you have to engage with people that disagree with you. If you only ever talk to people that believe what your religion says, you don't grow. If you're an atheist and you only ever talk to atheists, you're not going to grow. Right? This all goes back to John Stuart Mill as well. This came up before, but in this context, I would say it this way. Right? If you can't argue with somebody to explain to them why you believe what you believe when they don't, then you don't really know what you believe. To really be able to figure out what you believe, you have to be able to present it to people that disagree with you. That's how you grow. That's how you become a grown human being, a person. So, I'll say that this is actually going to come up again. I didn't actually need to go back. When you engage with people, you have to assume good intent. Right? Assume that they are there because they want to learn. They want to grow just as much as you do. You have to assume they are not selfish, even if they are. You have to resist confirmation bias, and you have to resist radicalization, and you have to resist appeals to emotion. Right? I'll say more about that in a moment. There we go. So this is a list of guidelines for engaging with others. It's not the main point of my talk, but I think it's worth going through these. People always say, well, how do I get together with somebody that I disagree with and engage with them? There's a lot to be said about how we should engage with other people. Right? I should note, this list, there was a list put out by Braver Angels. Do you have a Braver Angels chapter or group here at all? You should invite Braver Angels to campus. They do a lot of really great depolarizing work. They have interesting debates. They have interesting ways of doing things. They put out a list of guidelines for discourse. This list is not identical to their list. I think I improved upon it. They might not think I improved upon it. But here's a list, and I just want to go through these somewhat quickly. First of all, always speak with particular people. It's too often in our society that we engage with or we pretend to engage with one person in order to make the point to other people. Right? You want to hear these catchphrases, you want to get the sound bite, not because the person you're talking to will take them in, but because somebody else might hear it. That's not what you want to do. That's not really engaging. That's trying to engage an audience rather than a single person. We shouldn't be doing that. When I give talks like this, I more or less pretend the audience is one person. Right? That's how I try to work it out, because I want to be engaged with somebody. Right? When you guys ask questions, I'll be engaging with those questioners themselves. Right? Not because somebody else over there might be helped by hearing it, but because the person that asked the question deserves a good response. Okay? So engage with particular people. The golden rule, treat people as you wanted to be treated, right? So listen carefully. People talk about active listening. I used to wonder what that meant, but I think I know now. Right? People often stand there and pretend they're listening, when really what's going on is they're thinking about what they're going to say next. That's not the way to go. In order to have an actual response to somebody, you have to hear what they're saying. You have to really listen to what they're saying. Right? It's too easy to sort of pretend you heard what they said, because after all, they sound like just somebody else from that field. Right? They're a Democrat, so they probably believe this, so I'll just respond as if they said that without listening. Don't do that. Right? You actually have to listen actively to figure out what you're responding to. You have to admit commonality as well as your opposition, right? Really important. We do, in fact, have conflict. We do, in fact, disagree with one another, but we also have a lot of commonality. I said a little bit ago that oftentimes polarization is really just among political elites. And here's an example. There's a group called More in Common. I don't know if you know More in Common's work. They've done a lot of this polling to find out what people believe. And so, for example, Democrats will say that Republicans don't believe that we should teach about slavery in school. That's just not true. Like 85% of Republicans think that we should teach slavery in school. Right? For their part, Republicans will say that Democrats believe that every white child in school should be made to feel guilty about slavery. Again, not true. Like 85% of Democrats will say, no, of course no child should be made to feel guilty for this. That doesn't mean they don't need to learn it. There's actually a huge amount of agreement amongst the general populace about what should be taught in school with regard to slavery and all other sorts of race issues. Somehow, the perception is that there's this huge disagreement. There's what's called, More in Common calls it a perception gap. How are we going to get past that perception gap? We have to talk to one another. That's really important. So you should admit when you disagree, but you should also admit when you agree, right? You can only do that if you're actually listening to that person to figure out what they're saying and be willing to ask them about it. Or recognize your feelings. Somebody said this before. Feelings should not be an end to discussion. It's too easy to say, oh, you offended me. Oh, you hurt my feelings. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. That's not going to help. What you need to do is question yourself. Like, why am I offended? Why am I feeling bad now? Right? And be willing to ask that of other people as well. So, turning around. Use shared terminology. That's often quite hard. I had this discussion with my son just a couple of days ago where he said we don't listen to him. He's 15, so you can imagine what that's like. But I kept, yes, I'm a philosopher even at home. I kept pushing him, like, what does that mean? And at first he was saying, well, you don't change what you're saying afterwards. Like, so this is in particular about a consequence that he received for some action. I won't go into those details. And I said, well, actually we did though. We changed it from this to this. And he said, yeah, but you didn't do exactly what I wanted. I'm like, so to you, listening means that we do what you said we should do. And he said, yeah. Okay, now that I know what you mean by listening, I will agree, we're not gonna listen. Right? But we had to get past that point to move on, really important. So the shared terminology, and it could be really difficult, don't get me wrong. Getting shared terminology can be really quite hard. Remember that biography matters. What does that mean? It means if you're arguing with somebody about abortion, for example, you might want to figure out if you're arguing with somebody that has a particular religious worldview, or if you're talking to somebody who's an atheist. That might make a difference. Same thing for end-of-life conversations, right? If you're talking to somebody who's an atheist, they might have a different view about ending life than if you're talking to a religious believer. I'm not saying that those are going to be on an equal footing. What I'm saying is you have to know who you're talking to. Right? You might not agree with them, but if you want to actually engage them, you have to get a little bit into them, a little bit to try to understand what their view is, where they're coming from. The biography matters. Recognize that you're fallible. We are all fallible. If you go into a conversation thinking, I know what's best and I just have to convince these people, that's not recognizing your fallibility. You have to recognize you're fallible. I would suggest you go into any conversation thinking, what can I learn? Where might I be wrong? That's a far better way to go. Recognize your fallibility, be curious about it, humble, open to correction. Question stereotypes. Always question stereotypes. You have them. You might think you don't have any stereotypes in your mind that make you think what you do, but you do. We all do. Right? You have to be willing to question your own stereotypes, and you have to be willing to question the stereotypes of whoever you're talking to. Right? A weird example, I was teaching in somewhat rural Virginia, and a student in the class had a very heavy Southern drawl, and I will admit, it took me a while to realize this, that made me think she wasn't very bright. Turns out she was one of the brightest students in the class, if not the brightest. Right? Simple stereotype, I had to put it aside. Right? What a person wears, how a person dresses, how they hold their hair, whatever. Those aren't the things that matter at all, although they do affect the way we think about people. And it's hard to put those aside, but you have to do that. Respect people, not necessarily their views. As Dr. Swan knows, I hold some pretty weird views about politics, and I know a lot of my colleagues think I'm crazy for that reason. But really what they think is my views are crazy. They think I'm misguided, but they respect me enough to keep talking to me about it to try to figure out why I believe what I do, why I might be wrong, how they might convince me, and I do the same thing. Right? You respect the person, not their views. If you respect the person, you stay and you talk to them. If you respect the person, you think they're worth engaging with and you think they're worth trying to correct. Recognize that there might not be an either-or situation. It might be that neither view is correct or that both views have part of the truth but not the whole truth. Right? And we have to recognize that that might be the case in any particular thing. It might be the case in the abortion debate, it might be the case in the debate about who the best president is, or the worst president, or what have you. Right? There might be any number of possible answers here. We should recognize that there are always going to be more than two views. And we should be willing to compromise, and we should be able to civilly disagree. We shouldn't say, let's agree to disagree. That's not enough. You can have civil disagreement. You can say, yes, we disagree. Here's why I think you're wrong. You tell me why I think I'm wrong. And let's go and think about it some more, and maybe we'll come back and talk more about it later. Be consistent. Right? My father is 86 years old, so I don't blame him too much for this, but he's not consistent in the way he talks at all. In part, I think that's because he was a school teacher and he misses having an audience, a captive audience. So as soon as he starts convincing somebody that he's right, what does he do? He switches sides. Without noticing it, without telling anybody. He'll start arguing against himself because he wants to keep the argument going. Don't do that. It's a bad way to go. Be consistent, be specific about what you disagree with. That doesn't mean you can't change your mind, by the way. Of course you can change your mind, right? But when you change your mind, you have to say that you're changing your mind, that you're recognizing something is wrong. This happens, right? I have a paper defending, I don't want to get into the controversies about it, but I have a paper defending the need for parental licensing. Lots of people take issue with it, and I've started thinking I might be wrong. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I might be wrong. All right, I'll still think about it. Finally, keep the conversation going, right? Don't end it with just one talk. Keep it going. Okay. There we go. So I want to encourage you to engage in civil discourse. But what does that mean? Right? What does it mean to be civil? What I say civility is a tendency toward intellectual discourse or intellectual engagement with others. Right? Importantly, it is not just politeness. I'm just going to try to bring them all up again. All right, there we go. It's not the same thing as politeness. It's about engaging with people because you recognize that they are worthy, because you recognize that you are smart too and you're worthy too, but you might be wrong. So if you have this idea that you should be civil, what does that mean? It means that you recognize that there's need to engage with others to figure out the truth, right? Learning is a social process. This was talked about a bit before as well. It's not just being polite. Here's a problem with being too polite anyway, right? You can be really polite and never actually engage. People are polite sometimes because they think they shouldn't disagree. You should be willing to disagree. Being polite sometimes undermines respect. If you're so polite that you're not willing to tell somebody that you think they're wrong, again, you're not showing them respect. Right? Politeness is one thing, and we sometimes use civility to mean polite. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is really being willing to engage in disagreement as well as agreement. Not thinking it's time to walk away, not thinking it's time to just humor somebody, but actually engage. We should challenge each other. We should, again, assume good intent, not selfishness. We shouldn't have the confirmation bias. We shouldn't be willing to radicalize. I think Dr. Joshi called this group polarization earlier, where if you hang out with people that believe basically the same thing, you get more and more polarized into that way of thinking. And that is true for non-political and non-ethical questions as well as it is for political and ethical questions. If you hang out, how many of you like Star Wars? How many of you like Star Trek? Yeah, so I'm surprised there aren't more for both, but there were a lot more for Star Wars than for Star Trek. Here's the thing, if you hang out with Star Trek people, which, Star Trek is better. I'll leave that at that. But if you hang out with only Star Trek people, you might really come to think, yeah, Star Trek rules, Star Wars was just stupid. You get more polarized in that direction on these crazy issues. Right? We know that. So you shouldn't allow that to happen. That's what I mean when I talk about resisting confirmation bias. You should seek out people that you disagree with. Really important. Okay. Again, resist the appeals to emotion. And final point, which up before, there we go. It's not just civics. Right? Civics is about the city, about politics. We engage in discourse about those issues. We engage in discourse about whether whether the federal government should be sending troops of any sort into American cities. I think that's a hugely important discussion. We should engage with discussion about immigration and deporting people that came here either legally or illegally. I think that's a hugely important discussion. But I also think it's important to discuss with people, like, what's going to make my life better? Should I try to get a job with a big bank? Should I try to get a job with a big corporation? Should I become a teacher? Right? Should I become a doctor? I think those are questions that you can engage with others that will help you make better answers. Other sorts of things as well. Should I go to church every Sunday? Should I try smoking pot? Is it okay that I want to use cocaine from time to time? Here's a different side of that. Would you hire somebody that you knew used those things? Right? Those are questions that you can have civil discourse about that don't necessarily have anything to do with political society. In our culture, they often do because those things are illegal, right? Even in California, I guess marijuana is legal by California law, but correct me if I'm wrong, it's still illegal by federal law, right? Yeah. Right? So that's a really big civic question for civil discourse. But whether or not you should be using marijuana at some point, that's a question for civil discourse as well. It has nothing to do with civics. Right? Okay. That's all sort of a prelude to getting into civil discourse with somebody. Now, what do you do when you're in civil discourse with somebody? How do you actually engage them in a productive way? Right? That's what I want to talk about for the most part. That's the real goal here, to try to give you some tools to actually get together with somebody and engage civilly in discourse that you can try to figure out what's going on, why they believe what they believe, why you believe what you believe, why you're agreeing, why you're disagreeing. Right? The method that I'm going to give you primarily works with these 6 principles of toleration. No? 6 principles of toleration. These are classic, standard principles of toleration. I didn't make any of them up, although I'm going to give you my definitions for them. There are different understandings of them, and you can work that out as well in civil discourse. But each of these principles has had an impact. Each of these principles has had a real impact on society. They have all impacted law. Right? These principles are what we would call normative principles of toleration or jurisprudential principles of toleration. They are used by courts very explicitly sometimes. They're also used by legislators, often explicitly, but for lack of a better term, dishonestly. Right? Legislators will say they're instituting a law for one of these reasons, even though that's not really the reason. I think the judiciary is better about this. They have these reasons in mind, and they will use them. In short, there are a variety of reasons why we think interfering with somebody is reasonable. We think it's okay to interfere with somebody if they hurt others, if they offend people, if they're immoral, if they hurt society, if they're going to hurt themselves, or if we can help people. That's a summary of the 6 principles. Principles are the harm principle, offense principle, morality, society, paternalism, and benefits principle. Again, these are all endorsed in American law at different points. Whether they should be endorsed by American law is a different question. It's a question I'm not answering. That's a question I'm not answering, and I'm not going to answer that doorbell if that's what that was. But they are all endorsed at various points. And you should try to figure out which of the principles you endorse when you go into dialogue with somebody. And you should try to figure out what principles they endorse. And then you could figure out how to have an engagement with them, a discourse with them that could actually be productive. Right? So try to figure out what they are. So, there we go. Okay, so these are the 6 principles. The harm principle, this is perhaps the most famous. This is from John Stuart Mill on liberty. Although it actually predates Mill, it's present in Locke already. I think it's actually present in Plato. And the case really is that most of these principles have been around for a very long time for a very good reason, but they don't get full articulation until the 19th century with Mill and other people coming after him. So the harm principle, this is my rendition of it. It's not quite Mill's, and that's okay. It's always a good reason to constrain or interfere with an individual that their act causes, or will likely cause harm to another. And I bet all of you think this is right. Right? The harm principle is pretty universally accepted. Right? Of course, if you're going to harm somebody, we have reason to interfere with you. Right? reason to interfere with you. It's good reason to interfere with you. Philosophers would say it's prima facie reason to interfere with you. That doesn't mean it's decisive, right? If somebody slaps me across the face and then runs to the taxi stand, gets a taxi to the airport, gets a flight to Russia, should the government do anything? At a certain point, you say this is silly, right? They slapped him across the face. We're not going to try to extradite him from Russia to bring him back to punish him. That's just not worthwhile, right? The principles serve as necessary conditions, but they're not always sufficient. And they're only really serving as a necessary condition for you if you accept the principle. I think all of us accept the harm principle. Is that right? How many of you are willing to endorse the harm principle? Good. You should endorse the harm principle. That's really clear. I'm not going to ask you that with the rest of them because I might scare myself. The offense principle. It's always a good reason to constrain or interfere with an individual that their act caused, causes, or will likely cause offense to other, whether that be a matter of speech, hanging up a picture of somebody nude, getting drunk in public, whatever it might be. Right? People get offended by all sorts of things, and there are people out there who very clearly think this is reason to interfere. This is reason to stop tolerating. Right? Again, each of these is a principle of toleration, which means they indicate a necessary condition for ending toleration. Right? A lot of people think being offensive, or maybe being offensive enough, is a reason to interfere. In this context, right, the real question here is going to be, who should be invited to campus? Right? Should we invited somebody to campus, what's his name, Curtis Yarvin? This is a guy who now thinks that we should be a monarchy. Right? I don't know how many of you paid attention to this dude. A few of you, right? I'm guessing some of you think he should not be platformed on a college campus, right? Or Milo Yiannopoulos, however you say his name. I'm guessing some of you think he should not be platformed on a college campus. That is to say that you think offensiveness, or it's likely to be because you think that offensiveness is a reason to interfere. The morality principle, it's always a good reason to interfere or constrain somebody because they're acting immorally or immorally enough. I think that there are things that you can do that are immoral, that require that we interfere. I think there are things that you can do that are immoral that don't. So here's a weird example. I think it's immoral to get stoned, drunk, or high every day of the week. And if you're getting stoned every day of the week, all the time, I think you're acting immorally. I would stand by that. I would give you an argument for it, but we'll put that to the side. Here's a separate question. Should you be interfered with for it? Right? That's a very different question. Yes, I think it's immoral. It's not clear to me whether or not we should interfere. If you think it's so immoral that we should interfere, then you're endorsing the the morality principle, right? The society principle is a bit different. It doesn't talk about whether it's immoral or not, but whether it's against society's ethical code of conduct, right? Societies have ethical views. They have views about the way we should behave that may or may not correspond to morality. So a classic example here is the case Loving v. Virginia. This is a black and white couple in Virginia in, I'm going to forget the year, let's say 1870s or 80s, anybody know? 1960, was it that late? Wow, okay, I was not going to guess that late. In Virginia at the time, it was illegal for a black person to marry a white person, vice versa. Right? They moved to DC to get married because it was legal there, and then they moved home, and they were arrested. Right? Here's what I would say about that. They were violating the societal code of ethics in Virginia at the time. That seems fairly clear. It was against the law because the people didn't want it to happen there. Should they be arrested for it? That's, again, a separate question. Right? Now we don't think it's immoral. I don't think it was ever immoral, but it was clearly against the society's code of ethics at the time. Now I think there's nowhere in the country that it would be against the society's code of ethics. I hope I'm right about that, but I'm not sure. and we would certainly not interfere with it. But if you endorse the society principle, then you should recognize that things like Loving v. Virginia should be decided in a certain way, which is to say Virginia has the right to interfere in this case if it's going to hurt the society. Paternalism principle, it's always a good reason to constrain an individual or interfere with them if their act is going to cause themselves harm or stop themselves from flourishing, whether physically, financially, or otherwise. Right? So we don't let people do all sorts of crazy things. We don't let people legally do cocaine. Right? That's a pretty clearly paternalistic law. Right? Why don't we let you do cocaine? Because it's bad for you. Right? I think actually cocaine is bad for you. Again, should it be illegal? That's a separate question. Simple way to go is if you endorse the society principle, you have a reason to think it should be prohibited. It should be stopped, right? There are all sorts of other cases with that as well. The benefits principle, you think it's okay or you should interfere with some people or constrain them in order to benefit other people. So I'm guessing most of you in this room would endorse this principle too. So this is the principle that allows us to interfere with people to collect taxation, for example, so that we can pay for Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, etc. Right? What you're doing is interfering with some people, limiting them, not tolerating their spending their money, the money they've earned the way they see fit, so that we can provide a benefit for others. Right? So those are the 6 principles. Right? And the 6 principles, again, they've had a huge impact on the history of this country and Western Europe and really most of the world. The question is, which of these principles do you endorse? I've already indicated, I clearly endorse the harm principle. I won't tell you about any of the others, whether I endorse them or not. I'm not going to ask you whether you endorse them or not. It's something for you to figure out. But it's also something for you to recognize you will disagree with people. You'll endorse some of them. You might endorse the first 3. They might endorse the first 4, or they might endorse the first one, but not the second or third. They might endorse the 4th and 5th instead, right? Figuring that out can help you figure out how to have a productive engagement with them so that you can move toward figuring out what is in fact true, right? Okay. Along with the principles, we have certain values. I'm not going to spend as much time with them. That's not to say I don't think they're important. I do think they're important. I think in many cases, what's going on with the principles is that they are protecting these values or helping us get these values motivated. So having a mind, really important. Being fair, really important. Having freedom, having a community where one can connect with others, having security, having integrity and recognizing other people as having integrity, and diversity, all of these things are values, not just in our society, but everywhere. Right? There are also these 2 disvalues, suffering and waste. I think we pretty much all think suffering is bad and it should be interfered with if we can. We should try to get suffering to be minimized. I also tend to think waste is bad. I think most people think that's true, but I'm not sure that's as common as suffering. And again, if you recognize any of these as having value, if you endorse them as values, then they have normative weight for you. And they will affect the way you think about particular cases. Everybody is going to endorse some or all of these, but we're not going to all endorse the same ones. I can tell you, for example, I value community somewhat, but only somewhat. Right? I value community with people that I want to be in community with. I do not value community with people that I don't want to be in community with. And what is my community? Is it the community of scholars? Is it the community of philosophers? Is it the community of middle-aged, balding men? Right? Those are all different communities that I could be part of. I don't know that I really endorse any of them as being my community. Right? I do really value freedom. I really do value having a mind. I really do value being fair. Probably the others as well. Community is always less important to me. That doesn't mean it's not important at all, and it certainly doesn't mean other people will agree with me. Lots of other people really want a very strong community to be part of, and that's fine. We ignore that at our peril. Right? If we ignore it, if we don't allow people to have strong communities, what are they going to do? They're going to find strong communities, but those strong communities might not be good. I suspect this is part of why gangs and organized crime get power. I suspect this is why various political segments now have power, because we basically said, you're an individual, you're not part of a community, and they want to be part of a community. Okay, so again, figure out which ones you endorse, and figure out which ones your interlocutor endorses, and then you can have a more productive engagement. So what do we do with all of this? What I want to encourage, I think I'm right about 40 minutes? Yeah. So this will be the last part, I think. What I want to encourage you to do is to think like a judge, not like a legislator. I was walking on the street downtown Atlanta a couple of weeks ago, and there were all these scooters and bikes that are, you know, these electric bikes that you borrow for 10 or 15 minutes from Uber or what have you. Scooters especially seem problematic for some people I know. I don't know why. But they're just strewn throughout the street, on the sidewalks. And the person I was walking with said something like, there ought to be a law. Right? And what did she mean? She meant there ought to be a law against having these things on the sidewalk. I'm perplexed by that sort of thinking because obviously a lot of people like to use them or they wouldn't be there. Right? And more than that, they really do seem like they make life better. Right? You can get off of the train and you still have a mile or so to go, but the train doesn't go closer. You can get off of the train, borrow one of these things, and get much closer to your place of work. That's great, I think. More importantly, recognize what you're doing when you say there ought to be a law. If what you want is a law, then you're making this thing illegal, which has an impact on everybody moving forward. That seems like a bad thing. You shouldn't want to ruin things for other people just because it's inconveniencing you. And that's really what it comes down to. That's the way a legislator thinks. This is going to irritate some people, so let's make it illegal so nobody forevermore can use these things. I want to discourage you from thinking like that and encourage you to think rather like a judge. How does a judge come in? A judge comes in rather simply. A person's on a scooter and they accidentally bump into somebody, causing that person damage. The second person brings them to court. Right? Either in a criminal case if the police are involved, or I think more likely in a tort case. I could be wrong about which is more likely. But then they go to court and the judge has to hear both sides, try to figure out what's going on, what's of value to both people, what principles are at stake, who was actually harmed, who was actually offended, etc. And then the judge makes a decision about this very narrow case. That doesn't mean it has no impact later on. It does because of judicial precedent. But judges are really good at narrowly circumscribing their decisions. That's very different from what legislators do. You should think, when you're in a debate about abortion or about whether Milo should be brought to campus or whatever it might be, you should think, how would I approach this as a judge? Who are the parties involved? What's being disturbed? What's being made better? Which of these things are going to work and which of these things are not? All of these things matter, and we should strive to act like ideal judges. Right? Not all judges are ideal, not all judges are going to come at this impartially, but we should look to do that. We should look backward to see what went on and why would the case be solved that way. We should look at precedent and the principles and the values and try to figure out what's the narrowest scope to try to decide this case with impartiality and universality. So, thank you. So what you can do is just get into this discussion. If you're engaging with somebody, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, you can just say, why do you think there ought to be a law like this? Why do you think abortion should be illegal? Why do you think we ought to be more legally required to engage in recycling activities, et cetera, right? And try to figure out what's underlying their thinking when they say that. What principle is it that they're doing that, there we go. So you might think that they have a particular principle in mind. Ask them about it. Say, do you think this is a problem because it's causing harm to somebody? Or do you think it's a problem because it's offending somebody? Or whatever the case might be. And you can push on this. Right? If they say, no, that's not my thought. Right? If you say, Why do you think that the scooters, I'm not going to use those examples, I'll use the scooter example right now. Why do you think the scooters should be outlawed? Do you think it's because people are going to get harmed? And they might say, well, no, that's not really it. I don't really think there's going to be any serious harm. You push on it a little bit. You try to figure out maybe there are small harms that they're worried about. If they refuse to say that that's what it is, it's time to back off, right? You want to push, but you don't want to push too hard. You push too hard, that turns people off because people don't want to be hurt, don't want to be told that their thinking isn't what their thinking is. So switch, try another principle, or try one of the values, right? And again, if you think that they're not understanding, you can push a little. But again, don't push too hard because people don't want to be told that they're not understanding their own thinking. Right? So you can change to another principle or another value, and you can keep going like this, and you could probably get to the point, next one. You can probably, thank you, you could probably, yeah, it'll just stay there. You can probably get to the point where you get some recognition of the other person. What that's going to do for you is you'll have better understanding of the way they're thinking, better understanding of them, and they're going to have a better understanding of what you're thinking and a better understanding about you. And when you do that, A, you're not lonely because you've made a connection with somebody. B, you're depolarizing because you're recognizing the valuable reasons people have. Right? We should always assume people have reasons. We can figure that out by doing this. Right? Those things matter tremendously. It's why we get into this in the first place. Why do we want to have this? Because we want to end the loneliness epidemic, we want to limit or end polarization, and we want to grow ourselves morally. And we do that when we engage with people and try to figure out the truth about the matter. There's another slide here, but we don't need to do it. It's actually bringing up a couple of issues that we can talk about, but we won't. But if you could just... There you go. Thank you.
We'll now move into our portion for responses. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. I really appreciated your talk. I have many questions and some room for disagreement, but I'll be a good moderator and keep it to just one. I like that you mentioned that civil discourse isn't limited to the realm of civics alone. I wanted to ask what you make of the fact that civics is typically the only realm for this level of tension around disagreement that we see today.
Yeah, I think the big sword is a big issue. I think I think part of this is allowing governments a lot of power. You see this especially with school boards, right? I can imagine various people going to school board meetings and being very distraught about what their students are being taught, what their children are being taught by the teachers, whether it be, don't mention anybody that's gay in class, or don't mention religion in class, or whatever it might be. Those are sort of lower level, all right, I could have sworn this was all off before. Those could be sort of lower level entrance into civics. I don't know if school boards really count as part of civil society in that way or not, part of the government, but they certainly seem to have that effect. And, of course, legislators have an impact on those school boards. So I think we see some of that right there. And I think also just the government, again, having so much power means the government gets to control a whole lot of things. I used to live in a very small city outside Atlanta. It's actually very well run. But there ended up being big disagreements because basically the city wanted to take this big factory area that was being closed and have a redevelopment made there that would bring in a lot more people. And a lot of people in the city, including people on the city commission, didn't want those people, right? If the city wasn't involved in those decisions, it wouldn't be a matter of civics.
Thank you. We'll now move forward to hear from Tricia Moss.
Thank you so much. This was really helpful, and I really liked what you said about sharing your disagreement as a sign of respect. I really like that. So my question is, where is the line between having these hard discussions and maybe opening up the possibility of more harm by giving people a platform, or when the ideas that people are arguing for would harm others. And an example that I can think of is there is a small but loud group of people who think that women shouldn't be able to vote anymore. Do we need to engage with ideas like this that are directly harmful, or is it more harmful to engage with them?
So ultimately, I think it's a really difficult question. What's the cutoff point? Is there a cutoff point? I tend to be very pro-speech, so I don't want to cut off the dialogue very early at all. Part of me wants to say, well, nobody's actually harmed by this speech, right? It would only be a harm if those people making those sorts of speeches got power of the government and then made it illegal for women to vote, right? And until that point, there's nobody actually harmed, right? You might be offended at it, but that's not harm. Is that a good reason to stop them? Is that a good reason to end toleration? Is that a good reason not to allow them to speak on campus? I think those are difficult questions, but I want to have the dialogue about them and let people think it through on their own. I'll add another point to this, which is that if we don't allow that dialogue, what do you think is going to happen with those people? They're not just going to say, oh, nobody's listening to me, I guess I'll stop. We have a lot of historical knowledge about what happens to such people, right? I don't know if it's quite an overlap with the group, but these people might just all turn out to be incels, causing a lot more damage underground than they would if they were allowed to speak. But I don't think it's a good idea to cut that speech off, but I think you have to have the dialogue and try to figure out why they think what they think. What values do they think are being preserved by disallowing women from voting? What values do they think might be promoted by it? What principles would abide by it? I assume the society principle is relevant here. So you might ask, well, what do you want from society?
I want to ask a follow-up, and I will push you on the harm principle. So I may not have written it down correctly, but I remember it as being behavior that will harm someone, their self, other people, or is imminent and likely to cause harm. Is that a fair representation?
Take out the with the self, but otherwise, yes.
So you point out if they got into office and banned the right to vote as the line of harm. So would you say that when someone is, say, running for office and that is their campaign pitch, is that creeping up on the harm principle at all in a level that you recognize, or is it just like binary? There's only harm once they're there.
The latter. It's only harm once it's there. But I would say, like the creeping up thing, it worries me that you're getting close to a point where somebody might actually be in office and be able to institute those laws. Certainly that's worrisome, right? But I think the proper response to that is to have real debates, not the pseudo debates that politicians have these days, right? Go back to, it was Gore v. Bush, I think, was the last presidential debate run by the League of Women Voters. And once the League of Women Voters was basically kicked out by the Democrats and the Republicans combined, that you lost any real debates that these people had. But I think if you had real debates, you would get to see why ending the right to vote for any particular group is probably a really bad idea.
Thank you. I take that overall as you're saying that like the speech itself is not the problem, more so it's there are bigger problems beyond their saying these things. I'd ask an additional follow-up. You mentioned as well that if you're having that conversation, there's a point where you need to consider if you and your interlocutor have separate goals. How do you address that issue, and how do you identify that point?
Again, I think the dialogue is where it comes out. You have to figure out what values you and your interlocutor are endorsing, what principles you and your interlocutor are endorsing. And it may then turn on, well, you're endorsing the society principle here. I take it that's the principle that's most likely involved. And you might say, well, what is it about society that you want protected, right? What values in society do you care about? What values in society do I care about that I think are going to be hurt by this process, right? Talk that out, and you can really, I think, be more productive than we are.
Thank you. We'll now move to Abdul.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen, for your talk. I really liked how you argued that we should engage with those we disagree with civility and toleration. What stood out to me in the beginning of your talk, you mentioned how people, especially now in the age of social media, tend to stray away from engaging with others. So my question is, what concrete habits do you think individuals can implement to truly engage each other rather than perform engagement for their in-group?
Yeah, I think the first thing is always to ask why the person believes what they say they believe. Right? That's the very first question. Somebody says women shouldn't be able to vote. Well, why do you believe that? Right? Do you believe women are going to vote in less intelligent ways than men? Okay, why do you believe that? Right? What possible evidence do you have? Tell me what evidence you have for this sort of claim. Lack of evidence suggests, well, maybe this isn't right? So I can maybe give you evidence that women can come up with better decisions. Maybe we know that, I don't know if we know this, but maybe we know that women are better lawyers than men. Again, I don't know that this is true. But if it were, that would be a good reason to think that women should be voting. And it's not enough to say they're not better than. If they're at least as good as, then you have every reason to think they should vote. There's sort of, I don't know how seriously I mean this, but there's sort of evidence that men are not as bright as women, right? Why do men die younger than women? Well, often it's because they take really stupid risks, right? Men, as it happens, if you look at a bell curve of intelligence, men happen to, a new claim, although somebody was canceled for saying this, so maybe I shouldn't say it, men tend to have more outliers on the bell curve in both directions. So amongst geniuses, a higher percentage are going to be men for this reason, but also amongst, I don't know, what do you want to call them, fools? Anti-geniuses, or whatever terminology you want, they happen to be greater percentage men, right? And so they do stupid things and they die earlier. That's one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, right? So look at the evidence. What reason do you have to actually think that women shouldn't vote, right? So really push them on it. I think that's the only way to go. Try to figure out what principle or what value they're relying on. It might have something to do with their biography. Maybe they come from some religious group that is insistent on men being the dominant political group for some reason. We'll ask them about that and why they endorse that.
And I had a follow-up question. You briefly mentioned the topic of like politeness, and my question is, do you think that civility can ever become a barrier to the truth, where like politeness or restraint might suppress moral urgency?
Yeah, that's a tough one. There are a number of people today that say things just like that, right? By encouraging people to be civil, we're encouraging them not to take a strong stand. I think that's a mistake, right? Because for me, being civil means taking a strong stand. It means not physically taking a strong stand, right? It's not about beating somebody up or something like that, but it's saying, look, here's why I think you're wrong. Let me tell you, right? We need that. We need more of that. We need more protests. Right? They should be peaceful protests, but those are all things that I think we should engage in. So I don't think civility itself is a barrier in the way that some people do.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also was interested in your comments on social media. Oh, my bad. I wrote your name down as Dr. Swan, and I'm going to assume that you're not also Dr. Swan. Dr. Bradley, can we move to you? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much. As a respondent to this, I just wanted to offer up a few thoughts. I'd love to get your perspective here. Of course, you listed the principles, and the harm principle is a principle. I think one of the challenges there is that we don't all have the same definition of harm. I think that's one of the challenges today, is that some of us believe that free speech, offensive speech, uncomfortable speech is harmful. So the harm principle in and of itself is just sort of wrote with all these complications because we don't share those definitions. It was really interesting on the society principle. You know, what's interesting about Loving versus Virginia, of course, is it wasn't just that they were interracially married. Society had really concluded that lower class whites and lower class blacks especially could not get married. And that's what you had in that case because it would harm society. Right? That was sort of the thinking there. It was really taken by this point, which I think is really important in a university context. There is no growth or learning without discomfort. Right? There is no growth, there is no learning without discomfort. So you should want to be uncomfortable in class every now and then. And so here's my question. If speech is harmful, if discomfort is something to be resisted, I think one of the things that we see today is this tacit belief that if you disagree with me, you're saying that I'm a bad person. And when I disagree with you, and you say that I'm wrong, are you saying that I'm a bad person? And so, in general, we're resistant to this idea that we're bad people. So how do we work around this reality that people believe, whether they express it explicitly or not, that anyone who disagrees with me is a bad person? They're a racist, they're a fascist, they're a Nazi, whatever, they're a Marxist, they're a socialist, they're just bad people. And if someone says, I'm wrong, well, are you saying that I'm a bad person? So how do we work around that in terms of a charge and a disagreeable discourse?
Yeah, good. First, let me just briefly say something about harm. For me, I adopt and modify Feinberg's definition of harm. Joel Feinberg is one of the best normative jurisprudence scholars of the last century. And he says harm is a wrongful setback to interests. I think that's basically right. I modify it a little bit in my second book, but we won't get into that. But I think absolutely you're right that people have misunderstandings of what harm is. Maybe I should say different understandings, but I think there are lots of different understandings and they're all wrong except for the right, which of course is mine. But I think we do need to get clearer about what that is. I think harm as a wrongful setback of interests really captures what we want. Doesn't make it easy, right? Because what's wrongful? That's a difficult question. What's a setback to interests? Also a difficult question. But I think we have to have those debates when we're talking about these things. And I think, again, having them civilly is what's going to make us able to move forward together. So the bigger question, though, sorry, refresh my memory really quick.
Am I a bad person?
The bad person thing, right? Thank you. I think that's huge. And I think really what I want to say here is, first of all, no, I'm disagreeing with you because I respect you. Right? That's the first and foremost thing, right? If I didn't respect you, if I thought you were just a bad person incapable of being helped, incapable of being corrected, I wouldn't bother, right? But I respect you, so I think you are capable of this, so I'm gonna try. But then secondly, maybe more importantly, I think in part what I want is a cultural shift, right? We live in a society, we've always been an anti-intellectual society, but we live in a society that's gotten worse in this regard, and that people don't think it's okay to disagree with one another. So let me just take a quick poll. How many of you were told as children not to raise a particular issue when you got together with extended family? Yeah, that's a problem, right? If you're teaching children that they shouldn't raise difficult questions as kids, they're going to come away thinking they shouldn't raise difficult questions when they're adults. That's a problem, right? We have to correct that. We have to correct that in the beginning, in the home. Parents have to work on this. Teachers in elementary school have to work on this. I think there are other factors as well. Cost of housing has gone up tremendously in the last 50 years, but actually the cost of housing per square foot has not increased that much at all. Why does that matter? Because people are getting bigger and bigger houses. Right? When I grew up, it was normal that you shared a room with a sibling. Now, most people do not share a room with siblings. Not only that, current houses, my wife and I have recently bought a house about a year ago, like every bedroom has its own bathroom. Why do kids need their own bathroom? Why can't they share a bathroom, right? Why can't they share a bedroom as well, right? Part of the problem in that, you might think, why is he talking about the size of houses and extra rooms? But they're directly related. If the kids don't have to share these things, they never get the chance to engage with each other. They never get a chance to disagree with each other. And it's not just about the size of the houses, right? How many people have their own television, right? Or watch TV at all now because you just do it on your own computer, right? When I was growing up, I'm older than most people in the room, I think. When I was growing up, we had one phone in the house. You wanted to make a phone call, you had to convince everybody else not to be using the phone, right? That required that we disagree with each other. We had 2 bathrooms in the house for 5 people. You either had to wait or try to convince the person ahead of you to move faster, right? We've lost that because we've gotten more space from each other, even in the intimate setting of the home, right? We need to cut that. As a parent, I think if you have multiple children, you should have them share rooms. Certainly don't give them each their own bathroom. I heard today even parents are giving their teenage kids their own refrigerator for their room. Like, I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but it strikes me as a super terrible idea. Now they don't even have to come to the kitchen, where they might perhaps run into somebody else in the family.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen, and thank you, Dr. Bradley. We'll now move to the question and answer section that will be moderated by Dr. Swan. Thank you.
Right, so Professor Di Silvestro, Professor Schubert will find you if you indicate that you have a question in the conventional way. It looks like there's...
So for a long time, I have had a real difficulty with the word tolerance. And I think it means different things to different people. But for me, if somebody said, I disagree with you, but I will tolerate you, to me that is very offensive. Just because it means I don't respect you, I don't want to listen to you, but I will tolerate you. You can say whatever you want, but I'm not listening, kind of thing. Have you ever considered, maybe I just don't understand the word tolerance, but to me, I would never say to one of my children, I tolerate you. And I think it's offensive that we say that to other ideas, or I kind of feel like even the word tolerance needs to be maybe replaced, just because it sounds like a division. It sounds like keeping people polarized, that we will tolerate them. I don't know. Have you thought about that at all?
Couldn't have asked a better person this particular question.
Yes, I have thought about that a lot. I think it's the right word. I'll start with that. And so there's so many things I could say. I'm just trying to figure out how to limit this in some way. I distinguish toleration from tolerance. Tolerance is a virtue, toleration is a behavior. And I absolutely think we should tolerate more. And it's not offensive to say you're tolerating somebody, because when you tolerate them, you are in fact expressing a disagreement or some sort of disapproval with them. That's true. But you're also expressing a value, namely, in this case, I assume, respect for them. Right? You don't tolerate... I wouldn't say even that I disagree with termites, right? But I surely don't tolerate them, right? I disagree with them, and I don't want them to do what they do. In the southeast of the states, you have to worry about these things a lot, and so we hire people to come in and make sure that the termites die. And I'm totally okay with that, right? When I disagree with a person, though, I'm still disagreeing with them, indicating there's something I oppose, right? And so, yes, there's a division of sorts. But what links us still is the fact that we respect each other, right? I don't tolerate beings that I don't respect. I do tolerate those that I do respect. I say a lot more, but I hope that gets to the main.
Next question's over here.
Thank you for your talk. I guess my question is, that might seem a little broad, like how are we supposed to sort of find people to have these real contentious disagreements with, and sort of like safely, because are we not kind of limited by our sort of environment and those sort of echo chambers or whatever? Like, for trivial sort of example, like I'm a Sacramento Kings fan, and the people that I'm going to talk about basketball with are going to be other Sacramento Kings fans in Sacramento or around here, and so I'm going to come away with the opinion that the 2002 Western Conference Finals totally rigged for the Lakers, against the Kings, all that sort of stuff, and come about it in a not sound, logical, good way here, and that that's trivial or whatever, but like, I'm also, like, you know, I grew up very religious. I grew up LDS. I'm going to have opinions about gay marriage if I'm only talking to my immediate environment around me. And so you think, okay, get outside of your environment. Well, I mean, very easy for me to do as a white man. I can imagine if you are, I mean, I don't want to speak about groups that aren't me, but like, if you're going to the, like, we should make it so black people shouldn't have the right to vote discussion, and you are African American, that's putting you in some risk of potential harm there. Not like harm in words. There's a greater chance that there's not going to be good faith people there who would do you harm. Same if, you know, you're a woman in a situation. So then you might think, okay, but like the internet is maybe a tool here. I don't know that having more of these discussions on the internet is good either. Look at Twitter. So I know it's kind of big and rambly, but like, I don't know, how do we go about finding good community with which we disagree with?
Well, so there's a lot of things to be said here. I mean, first of all, let me just say clearly, I wouldn't suggest that anybody going to have really good engagement with somebody in an environment where they think they really are physically unsafe. Don't do that, right? I don't want to encourage you to be super risky with your life. That would be a bad idea. But I think there are a lot of safe ways to do that. I think we do that more or less well in various campuses, college campuses. I think college is where you're supposed to come and do that, right? A lot of parents from conservative backgrounds like to get upset that their students, their children, when they go away to college, get changed. Then they blame professors. It ain't the professors. Like, the old joke is, like, if I had that much power over my students, they'd all be doing the reading. They'd look at the syllabus, right? But that's not what happens, right? What happens is you go to college and you meet people from a lot of different backgrounds. And then you're exposed to those different ideas relatively safely, right? And I think that's what we want to have more of. And there are a bunch of organizations across the country now, bridging organizations. Send me an email if you can't find a list, and I'll point you in the right direction, that do all these things. There's Make America Dinner Again, right, which is basically an organization that encourages people with different views to get together for dinner, right? There's Living Room Conversations. There's all of these different sorts of organizations that are doing just this. My alma mater, my college alma mater, has these, can't remember what they call it, but it's basically, they're asking alumni to set up a dinners for like 10 or 12 people and then have a discussion about serious topics. And I take it they sort of meet out and have different people together. There are a lot of different organizations doing these sorts of things, making it very healthy. And I do think the internet can be used here. There's a new AI-helped tool called Sway that was started with a philosopher. And the basic idea there is you can have a debate with somebody online that you disagree with, and if you say something too, I don't know, too offensive or something like that, call it the captain, I don't know the analogy they use, steps in and says, you might want to rephrase that, right? Really helpfully. And you could also just go to the captain, again, I don't think it's the right name, and say, can you give me a background about such and such, right? I don't remember the details. Help me fill this in. Right? And so I think there are these online tools. That's not the only one. There are several others, again, I can point you to more. And there are a lot of organizations that are doing this. Braver Angels nationwide doing really good work. If you don't have a Bridge chapter on campus, you should have one. They're doing great work as well.
I'd like to try to squeeze in 2 more questions.
Hi. So we're talking about like ability and how to engage in like these intellectual discussions, and you gave us these guidelines, but I also think that the guidelines you gave like help with another goal which you were talking about, which was engaging in real debate and how it leads. And so I was thinking, do you also think that these guidelines prevent like heuristic arguments where people are just trying to like, because you can engage in an intellectual argument and also just want to prove that you're right instead of being like, oh, actually wanting to find the truth. So do you think that the guidelines you provided also prevent like these heuristic arguments?
If followed correctly, yes. Right? I mean, the idea is you should go into it with curiosity, not seeking to teach, but seeking to learn. So once you've got that on board, you're not just trying to get the other people I mean, I stand here as a philosopher, and it's easy for me to say that because it's sort of what I'm trained to do, but I think we're all capable of this.
So a lot of, I guess, a lot of the ideas surrounding social media is that by creating these algorithmic echo chambers, we create a lot of radicalization, something you seemed very opposed to in your talk. How would we engage with someone who seems to be radicalized? Or how, because I don't believe that there is no one that is like not worth saving.
You don't believe that there's no one that's...
I don't believe that anyone is not worth saving. I feel like you can have a conversation with anyone.
Yeah.
So how would you engage with someone who seems almost like diametrically opposed?
Yeah, so again, there are lots of organizations doing similar things that help with this. There's a new organization in Virginia that I'm going to forget the name of right now. It'll come to me eventually. Pluralism Labs. And I think they would help run something on campus too, but they bring together people with diametrically opposed views as well as some moderates. They like to have all three. They call it something illumination. I'm forgetting the right name. And so you can have that where it's sort of a safe contained thing where you've got a moderator that helps. I think that's one way to go. More generally, I guess I'm going to say, look, if you really think they're radicalized, do it really carefully. Right? I worry about anybody that's radicalized. But I tend to think, I don't know that I'm as optimistic as you are about this. I think there might be some people that are too far gone. But such is life, right? I tend to think I don't run into those people very often. Maybe that's because I haven't opened my bubble up enough. I don't know. But I think, yeah, try to engage, but just do it carefully. And again, there are these organizations that are there to help.
In this session, I only have left to encourage you to return for the fourth session. We'll be reconvening in about 10 minutes' time, and to ask you to join me in thanking the participants in session 3.